All right, so welcome back. Tonight's the altar. Everybody's coming to the altar tonight. This is an altar call. And we had all the things outside starting to work our way in, and we did the posts, the skins, the ropes, the pegs, the shekel. Now we're in this. Now that we're in, this is the only place that everybody was allowed to go. After this, only priests. Because everybody was allowed to go in and offer a sacrifice at the altar to the priests. So from this point on, only the priests. But here is we're in the last hurrah of the normal people. This is the only place you could go in the tabernacle, was to the altar. And we went over this at Joshua's altar at Mount Ebal, and it still exists today, that I know of. Okay, Exodus 38, 1 through 2, gives you the dimensions of the altar. That was in the tabernacle. When you get to the temple, totally different because it's much bigger. This is the tabernacle. What are the dimensions? It was made of acacia wood, and it was 5 by 5 square. And I say 5 by 5, that's cubits. Depending on, remember how we went cubits 2 weeks ago it was? I'm going to go on the one that most rabbis agree with, 18 inches is a cubit. 5 by 5 square, 3 cubits high. The 3 meaning Father, Son, Holy Spirit, Trinity, and deity. 5 meaning Torah, 5 books of them, and goodness and grace. We're going to see a lot of grace tonight. There were 4 horns on the altar, 1 for each corner. And it says the sacrifice goes in all directions, the north, the south, the east, and the west, the 4 corners of the earth. So when you sprinkle the blood on the altar, the sprinkling of the blood was for all 4 corners, north, south, east, and west. Covers everything. And it was overlaid in bronze or brass, where God's judgment deals with sin. Remember last week where it showed Jesus being deity on wood, covering the wood? Remember here you have the brass or bronze overlaying the wood, judgment covering the sin. Now, this has nothing to do with the tabernacle, this is just me. When I was going through this, I said, why doesn't the metal melt? Right? Or why doesn't, you have wood, and you overlay it with bronze or brass, why doesn't it char or burn the wood that it's covering? That's just me asking. Does anybody else have the same curiosity? So like I said, this has nothing to do with the tabernacle, this is just me being curious. I wanted to know, so I'm going to tell you. How hot does it get, and why doesn't it burn or melt? Because, how hot was it? Acacia wood burns at 572 degrees. To the right is Celsius. Gold melts at 1948, 1,900, almost 2,000 degrees. Bronze melts at 1742. Brass melts at 1720. And flesh cremates at 1100. Yes, I called it crematorium. Because I wanted to know. I really did. I said, well, how hot do you have to get it to cremate? And they said 1100, sometimes 1200. But they said normally 1100. So there you go. You're cremating at 1100, that's well within the 1700 tolerance. That's 600 degrees cushion, right? So it's not going to melt bronze or brass. Even if you get it to 1200 or 1300, it's still not going to melt it. And you say, well, why doesn't it char the wood? I'm going to get scientific on you, and you're going to be impressed with me. Why doesn't it burn the wood? Because of this formula right here that I can't pronounce. It BTU, hour, foot, Fahrenheit, something like that. You can look it up. But this is the thermal conductivity of metals. Ooh. Brass is 69.33, copper 231, aluminum 136, mild steel 26, and bronze 71. The lower this number, the less it conducts heat, which means the lower the number, the cooler it is on the wood. Does that make sense? The higher the number, the hotter it is on the wood. So, if you're made it of bronze, that's a pretty low number, so it's going to dissipate the heat and it's not going to get that wood very hot. If they had mild steel back then, it would be really heavy, but it would not touch that wood at all, heat-wise. Okay? That was just me. That has nothing to do with the tabernacle. I just want to know why it didn't burn up the wood and melt the metal. All right, now let's get back to the tabernacle. In Hebrew, the word altar is mizbach. Yes, you have to do the throat clearing. Everybody said mizbach.
Mizbach.
Some of you did it pretty good. And this is the part that I added. I told you I added. All right. 4 letters. The mem, the zayin, the bet, and the chet. Everybody say chet. There you go. And we'll get to the numerical value of 57 in just a minute. These 4 letters for the altar, what do they mean? And like I said, I just added this 2 days ago. Mem, a time of probation followed by renewal. Zayin, through a divine completion. Bet, from God the Son. And chet, to new life and eternity. So the altar, pointing to the Messiah, if you read it as a sentence, is a time of probation followed by renewal through a divine completion from God the Son to a new life in eternity. Is that not talking about the Messiah on a cross? And what's it giving us? New life and eternity. Through His sacrifice on the altar, the cross. All in the word mizbach. Isn't that cool? All right. Now, the altar of sacrifice. Oh, I forgot to, let me go back. I forgot to do 57. Heinz 57. If you'll see in the bottom, 57 also has numerical value for the Hebrew word for red. Go figure. What does red signify?
Fear. Danger.
Blood.
Blood.
You can't have an altar without blood. What did Jesus have on the cross? Blood. What was the color of the ram skin over the tabernacle? Red. What did it symbolize?
Blood.
It also symbolizes, it has the same numerical value for the word for fear. And you say, wait a minute, how? I don't get that part. Fear has to come to the altar. And I'm going to show you what the altar really is here in a minute, and you're going to, oh, and we'll get to the fear part. But you have to take the fear to the altar. Why? So here, this is why. The phrase, altar of sacrifice, the phrase, has a numerical value of 369. If you remember from a week or so ago, there's only 3 times, like time of the day, mentioned when Jesus was being hung on the cross. Those 3 hours or times were the 3rd hour, the 6th hour, and the 9th hour. The 3rd hour is when He was nailed to the cross. The 6th hour is when darkness came. And the 9th hour is when He said it's finished and it was done. It was the only 3 times, hours, mentioned during the crucifixion. So the altar of sacrifice has the same numerical value of 369, and 369 also has a numerical value of the phrase, coming soon.
Nuh-uh.
Yes. So guess what was coming soon? The sacrifice of the Messiah. But wait, there's more. Also, change of paradigm is 369. And we say, what is paradigm? Well, it's 20 cents. Paradigm. So, somebody just got that. A paradigm is, the definition's down here, framework containing basic assumptions, ways of thinking, and methodology. Jesus, offering His perfect blood on the cross for a sacrifice, was change the way of thinking, change the methodology. Change the methodology? Yes. Change the method. What was going on before His sacrifice? The sacrifice of animals. So when He came, it changed the methodology. It changed the paradigm completely.
Thank you that we don't have to deal with all those bloody animals.
Yes. So isn't that cool? All right, let's go.
But priest-wise really wanted washing machines.
Yes. Now you know why they had 22,000 priests, because there was a lot of clothes they had to clean. Here's your types of offerings. There are 5 types mentioned. And the first one being the burnt offering, Leviticus 1 through 5. It's brought to the priest. The priest lays his hand over the head, transferring the guilt to the sacrifice from the owner. Like the scapegoats, where they put their hands over the top of the heads of the scape. It transfers the guilt from the person giving the sacrifice to the animal that's being sacrificed. So that animal becomes you. Right? It's being sacrificed instead of you. Grain offering had to be unleavened. And because leaven represents sin, and you could bake it, and it had oil and all kinds of instructions on how to do it. You could bake it, and if you brought it baked to the priests, they broke it and put it on the altar to be burnt. That's why it says broken to pieces. Now, what we call the Last Supper. Jesus said to His disciples, take this bread, this is my body, that's what?
Broken for you.
Isn't that cool? Next is the peace offering. The peace offering, the animal had to have no blemish. That means nothing wrong with it. And they also laid their hands on the head, but this time they had to sprinkle the blood of the sacrifice on the altar. Not only did they have to sprinkle the blood on the altar, all 4 corners, but they also had to put it on the base of the altar. And I'll get to that in a minute. The sin offering, this is what you have on Yom Kippur. Once a year, the high priest goes into the Holy of Holies and sprinkles blood on the mercy seat. Right? That's called the Day of Atonement. Now let's think about this. Once a year, the blood was for the mercy seat. I'm going to get to that in a minute. Hold on. I'm going to get ahead of myself. Last one is the guilt and trespass offering. We think guilt and trespass, but let's morph it into something that we're not used to thinking about in a Western culture. This was for your reparation. This is what it's called here in Matthew when it says, if you come to the altar with your sacrifice, and therein remember you have something against your brother, leave the sacrifice, go reconcile yourself to your brother, then come. This is what it was talking about here. Now when it's talking about reparations, if I'm hunting, I'm just making this up because this didn't happen then, but let's say I'm hunting and I'm shooting at a deer and I actually kill my brother's cow by accident.
That
Well,
happens
now-
all the time.
Now I owe my brother a cow. But according to the law, not of the guilt and trespass offering, I had to not only pay for that cow, but 20% more back to my brother. Let's think about that for a second. if I didn't have, how are you going to do a cow and 20% of a cow? It is possible to pay it back in silver. So if I pay him back in silver, I had to pay 20% more than what the cow was worth. Payment of silver was an option. Judas paid 30 pieces of silver. Now think about this 20%. What does 20 numerically represent? Remember? 20 represents, same as silver.
Are you talking about shekels or what?
What does the number 20 on your key represent?
Redemption.
Redemption. So he's saying not only are you paying back, but 20% more, which is redemption. You're redeeming it back. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
But, wait, there's more. 20 in Hebrew is the letter Kaf. And Kaf means coming open-handedly, palms up, giving freely. And what did the Messiah do on the cross for our redemption? Open hands, palms up, freely giving himself as a sacrifice. But he gave more than 20% back.
Yeah.
All right, so that's the 5 types of sacrifices. All right? And these 5, remember I said the 5 represents, the Torah represents grace. Remember how I said we're going to get back to fear? Fear has to come to the altar, and I said we're going to come back to it. Watch this. The 5 types of sacrifices we just met. Grace covers the guilt from the guilt offering. Grace covers the trespasses. Grace covers the debt of sin. Grace covers your fear. And grace covers your peace. And we're going to get to this in just a minute. But this is the grace that he gave us through his sacrifice covers all of that. Animals only temporarily. He did it once and for all. So you're with me so far? Oh, but wait, it's going to get good. What does it mean? Remember he had the 5-fold ministry? You had apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, teachers, right? That's your 5-fold ministry. Here's your 5 types of offerings that we just went over. The burnt, the grain, the peace, the sin, and the trespass. So here's what they mean. Your apostles represent the burnt offering to offer life. The apostles were sent throughout the world to offer life to the world. The prophets represent the grain offering because grain represents provision. And the prophets provided prophecy. They provided vision. They provided guidance. Evangelists, peace, shalom, which means the evangelists go out in the world and preach the gospel to give shalom, which is nothing missing, nothing lacking, nothing broken. Pastors, sin represents blood because pastors want people to come to the altar so you can accept Jesus and be covered by the blood. Teachers represent the trespass offering because it represents abundance. Remember how the trespass you get 20% more back? So that's what it's saying. The teachers are not only giving, but they're giving over an abundance. So that's how the 5-fold ministry, the offerings, and how they all go hand in hand. Now let's get back to the altar. When you put an animal on the altar, there has to be complete consumption of the sacrifice. It has to be burned up completely. And fire destroyed it completely to where there's nothing left. And fire changes the composition to the point that it can never return to its original state. If I had a piece of paper and I burnt it, lit it, and that piece of paper burnt, and the ashes fell, I can't take those ashes and make it paper, ever. fire completely changes the composition. So once it's on the altar and fire consumes it, it can never be what it was. All right? The ashes were removed every day and transferred to the valley of death outside the walls. When David wrote the 23rd Psalm, "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of,
Yeah.
I will fear
No.
no evil." We're going to get to fear in just a minute. He was looking at this valley where they dumped the ashes. That's the valley of the shadow of death. That's what he was looking at. All right. Why did the priests do that? What does it mean for us? All right. When the ashes pile up, if you don't take them out every day, the ashes pile up and it snuffs out the fire. If you snuff out your fire, there's a remnant of sin. If it's not removed, it snuffs out your sacrifice and it snuffs out your praise. Are you with me?
Mm-hmm.
That's why it's important to remove the ashes. You bring whatever to the altar, and if the pile of ashes keep coming and you don't remove them and take them to the valley of the shadow of death, it snuffs out the sacrifice and you can't get a blessing. All right? The ashes of sin are sent to the valley of the shadow of death where it belongs. And priests were commanded to do this daily. We're commanded to do that daily. Remember, Paul says, "I die to myself daily." And we are to be transformed by the renewing of our minds. Daily, you take those ashes out and you put them in the valley of the shadow of death, the valley of death. So that when you bring something to the altar and it's consumed, you remove those ashes from it and take it to the valley of death where it belongs. Is everybody? Wouldn't that be a good vision thing to do, to say at the vision? All right. So you're with me on this so far. And that includes fear. Remember I said we're going to deal with fear? If you bring your fear to the altar and let the altar totally consume it till it's nothing left, then daily you take it, those ashes, the remnants of it, and put it in the valley of death. Fear has no hold on you. It's gone. It can never come back in its original form because it was turned to ashes and removed. Are you with me?
Mm-hmm.
So now you see how powerful the altar is, or can be. And that was just for fear. I mean, who else, whatever else you bring to the altar. All right, now, there was a procedure. The priests had a procedure that they had to do. This is the procedure. If the priests did it with a sacrifice, every sacrifice had this procedure. So that means it had to have been done to Jesus, our Messiah. And it was, and I'll show you. All right, the first one was the hekrib, which means to bring near. In other words, if I was going to offer my little baby lamb as a sacrifice, I had to bring it to the priest. Logically. Bring near the sacrifice to the priest near the altar or the door of the tabernacle. Leviticus 1:3, verse 10, chapter 3, verse 6, and verse 12. So bringing the sacrifice either to the front gate door of the tabernacle or to the priest. Matthew 5, if you bring your sacrifice and remember you have something against your brother. Doesn't that sound familiar? That's the hekrib. You didn't know that you're performing the hekrib when you do that. That's actually a priestly process. All right? The Messiah had to come near because he wanted to tabernacle with us. That's the start of the Hakriv. If it happened to Jesus, how and when? Watch this. Palm Sunday, what we call Palm Sunday, is the starting of the Hakriv. The priests were bringing the sacrifices up to the temple. The chief priest plotted to kill him to perform the sacrificial ritual ordination of God, the Messiah, to be brought to the priest. So on Palm Sunday, when he was coming in, all the other animals to be sacrificed were coming in at the same time. So he had to be brought to the priest. And he was. Matthew 27, 3 through 5 says, Judas threw the silver at the coins that he bought to betray him with, at the entrance of the temple where sacrifice was being brought near. So Jesus was being brought to the priests as the Hakriv. So the same thing happening to the animals was happening to him, because he is the sacrifice. Right? So what's the second step? First one is the Hakriv, the second one is the Samach. Everybody say Samach.
Samach.
There you go. That was a good one. Which means the transfer. The transfer is, like we said before, you lay your hands on the sacrifice and transfer the sin from the owner to the one who the destiny is of the sacrifice. And that's all in Leviticus 1, 3, and 8. Aaron laid both hands on the goats to bear all the sins. One was to be sacrificed, one was the scapegoat. Right? So there was a laying on of hands and a transfer. If that happened, it had to have happened to Jesus. All right. The one who lays their hands on the sacrifice has to identify with the sacrifice, becoming one with it, living instead of dying. Right? Watch this. Leviticus 5, 5 through 6, you have to confess your sin, then offer the sacrifice. How's that? What's that got to do with Jesus? All right. Luke 22. The priest smacked and hit him on the laying the hands on the head. Transferring the blasphemy from them to him. Because the reason they crucified him was because of blasphemy. When they nailed the title above his head, it says King of the Jews, that wasn't why he was crucified. They were making fun of him because he claimed to be the King of the Jews, which to them was blasphemy. So the actual charge that they killed him for was blasphemy. So when the Roman soldiers in Matthew 27, 27 touched him, hit him, smacked him, put the crown of thorns on his head, saying, "Hail the King of the Jews," they were transferring their blasphemy of him to him, just as the priest would transfer your sin to the sacrifice. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
The sin is being transferred to the sacrifice. So he is taking their blasphemy and receiving it. Right? All right? Now is the sachat, the killing. And that's pretty self-explanatory. The slaying of the sacrifice. The important ones were done by the priest. You can kill your own sacrifice if you wanted to. But the important ones, the important sacrifices were done by the priests. The offerer did the sacrifice knowing what it was for. Remember it said to confess? Well, if I confess, I know what it's for. So if you were doing a sin offering, you had to confess that sin before you killed it. He offered himself up as a sacrifice. He had to complete the order of God's ordination and purpose. And Judas represents individual. The priests represent the Jews, or the nation of Israel, and the Romans represent the Gentile world. Watch this. Judas, when he betrayed him with a kiss. So he touched him. There was the transfer. The Jews, the priests, smacked him, hit him, said, prophesy, who hit you? There was the contact. The Roman soldiers hit him, beat him, scourged him. There was the transfer. So all three had the transfer. Right?
Right.
The individual, the Jews, and the Gentiles. That doesn't leave anybody out. All right, then there's a zarah, or the sprinkling. And this is the good part. Blood must be applied. Has to be sprinkled on all four corners for the atonement of sins. Leviticus 1:5, verse 11. 3, 2, 8, and 13. And it has to be in the base of the altar. The blood has to be applied to the altar. The four corners and the base. Remember that. We're going to get to that in a little bit. Four corners and the base. Has to be sprinkled. All right? Messiah's blood was on his head, his hands, his feet, all four corners of the cross and the base of the earth. Because when the Roman soldier thrust his spear into his side, what came out?
Water.
Watch this. This is really cool. Isaiah 52:15. So shall he sprinkle many nations. Same word used to describe the high priest on the Day of Atonement. When the high priest went in the Holy of Holies and sprinkled blood on the mercy seat, that word sprinkle is the same word here in Isaiah 52:15. To sprinkle many nations. That means he's going to put the blood on the mercy seat of all the nations. Are you seeing the tie? So what Isaiah is saying, the same word here, but he's saying for all the nations. He's prophesying that Jesus' blood is going to cover and sprinkle all the nations. That's why in Hebrews 9, verse 11, and so on. So Christ has now become the high priest over all good things that have come. He has entered that greater, more perfect tabernacle in heaven, which is not made by human hands and is not part of this created world. With his own blood, not the blood of goats and calves and bulls, he entered the most holy place once and for all and secured our redemption forever. Oh, I'm going to stop here for just a minute. Do you remember a couple weeks ago when I said Moses, when he was up on Mount Sinai receiving the instructions to build the tabernacle, God told him, said, hey, here's the pattern up here, take a look, that I want you to do down here. Right? What does this say? Jesus went to where? The tabernacle where?
In heaven.
In heaven. What did he do in the tabernacle in heaven? What did he do? What did he do? What do you think Jesus did in the tabernacle in heaven? Sprinkled his blood on what?
The mercy seat.
The mercy seat. That's why Isaiah says he sprinkled it for all the nations.
Mm-hmm.
The one in heaven is for all the nations, for everybody. So he's saying, that's why when he was talking to the woman, he says, don't touch me yet, for I have not yet ascended. Why did he say that? Because he had to go sprinkle his blood on the mercy seat in the tabernacle in heaven. Once that was done, then he came back down and they let him touch him. Did you get that? Have you ever thought of that?
Never.
Had they touched him before he sprinkled his blood on the tabernacle mercy seat in heaven, it would have been contaminated and it would have been unclean. Is that not crazy? So remember when I said that the pattern of the tabernacle was the one in heaven? That's Hebrews. That's not what I said. That's what this says. Right? Once and for all, secured our redemption. So that's the sprinkling. All right? Now is the hiktir, which is the ascending. When you put the animal, sheep, goat, bull, whatever, and it starts to burning and you get that nice barbecue smell. That's the hiktir, the ascending of the, it says it's a pleasing aroma, right? Ascending up to heaven, Leviticus 1, 9 and 13, 3, 5, 11 through 16. The consuming of the sacrifice as it's sending it upward. It is sacrificed outside the camp, outside the city gates. If you were to sacrifice yourself and then bring it to the priest, you'd sacrifice it outside the camp. Where was Jesus hung on the cross? Outside the camp, outside the city walls. He sacrificed himself outside the city gates. High and lifted up on a cross for a sacrifice. Now watch this. This was a whole teaching I had, John 3:16, that everybody knows, but they don't know the connection to John 3:16. John 3:16 is connected to Moses and the tabernacle. John 3:14. As Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, even so the Son of Man must be lifted up, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have eternal life. Then you get, for God so loved the world that he gave his only. Now, I'm going to stop here. Let's back up and understand what was going on. You had the children of Israel. Serpents came, and they were biting the people, and they were dying. And they went to Moses. Hey, we're dying here. Ask God what we got to do. So God told him, he says, okay, build a cross, a pole, and a serpent, and put the serpent on the pole. Hang it way up, so that anybody who looks upon it will be cured and healed. Right? Why a serpent? Why a serpent? What does serpent represent? Satan and the curse.
Okay.
Right? So he put the curse up, lifted the curse high up, so that anybody that looked on it could be saved. So Jesus on the cross was high and lifted up, became our curse, so that whosoever believes in him should not perish but have eternal life. That's John 3:16. But it came from the serpent in Moses' day, lifted it up. So now you know what that means. Are you with me now? That's the only time that's ever mentioned. After that mention of the pole and the serpent and Moses, it's never mentioned again in the Bible until now. John 3:16. All right, that's the hiktir, the lifting up or the ascending. Then is the ahal, or the partaking. Like we said with Doc over here, that the priest did receive some of the sacrifices as food. And there was a partaking. Once you brought your sacrifice and you gave part to the priests, then there was a partaking. There was a receiving, there was an eating. The remaining parts were eaten as blessings and reconciliation and forgiveness. To partake, to eat, receive, you have to have complete identification linked to the blessings of reconciliation, forgiveness, and wholeness. The blessing of the sacrifice has come to us, partake of it freely. So what that's saying is the achal, or the partaking, is once you've brought your sacrifice, now it's time to partake of the blessing, to receive it. Jesus was lifted up, He became our curse. He gave us grace, mercy. His blood covers us. Now it's time to partake of it and partake of the blessing, so that we can be forgiven, so that we can be made whole, so that we can have blessings. Right? Then the last one. Well, that was the last one. Achal is the last one. It's to partake. So this is the footsteps of Jesus. That was the priestly, that's what they had to do, right, for the sacrifices. How does it relate to Messiah, the Jesus? All right. The Hakrib, bring yourself to Jesus. Come near to the altar. This is an altar call here. You got to bring yourself to Jesus. Come near to Him. The Samach, transfer your sins to Him. Identify with Him. Bring it all to Him. Lay it all on Him. Confess it all to Him. Because when you did the sacrifice, you had to confess it. Why? Because He is going to become that. Remember the transfer? The transfer, then you have the sahat, the killing. It dies now. The old is gone. The new has come. The grace is going to cover you. Take the ashes and put them in the valley of death where it belongs. Then there's the zarach. The blood must be applied or sprinkled for the cleansing. Hebrews 10:22, let us draw near with a true heart and full assurance of faith, having our hearts sprinkled, the same word, from evil conscience and our bodies washed with pure water. That's the wash basin next week. Stay tuned. So that's next week. But we have to have our hearts sprinkled with the blood. The same word that the high priest sprinkled the blood on the mercy seat once a year. The same word. Then you have the hiktir, lifted up to heaven, accepted to go higher. Then the achal, which is the partaking, receiving, eating, the remaining parts to receive blessings, reconciliation, forgiveness, so we can eat the shalom. When you eat the shalom, when you get to this part, there's nothing missing, nothing lacking, nothing broken. Because you gave it all at the altar. It's completely consumed. The ashes are removed. The old is gone, the new has come. Right? And I mentioned that the altar had to be sprinkled 4 corners and the base. Let's get a visual. Let's get a visual. 1, 2, 3, 4. North, south, east, west. Or north, south, east, west. And the base. That is why you see Catholics, when they go like this, that's symbolizing what they mean. That the blood applies to the north, south, east, and west, to the head, to the foot, to the hand, and the base. The blood sacrifice was sprinkled on all 4 corners and the base for atonement of sins, once and for all. Who will come? Remember how we said number 20 represents redemption, and it's the letter Kaf. He came with open palms, willing to freely give. Now, how do you see the altar? How do you see the altar now, knowing all of this? Did you see how the process, Jesus went through every single process that sacrifices go through to get to this? And I know it's a totally different teaching. It takes a long time to bring out, but He went up to heaven and sprinkled His blood on the mercy seat for eternity. He did it here, earthly. He did it there for eternity.
So it really wasn't done until He went up.
And now it makes sense on earth as it is in heaven. So this, the tabernacle, was a pattern, was a foreshadowing, was a template, whatever word you want to use, of what's there. That's why when God showed Moses to build the tabernacle, he says, look, build it after this pattern here, but here on earth. But it's only a temporary pattern of what's really up here forever.
So the cross was actually an altar.
Yes. The cross was actually an altar because that's where the sacrifice was made.
For a sacrifice.
The altar was made of acacia wood. Guess what the cross was made of? Acacia wood. Coincidence?
Nope.
So now, I'm going to go ahead and do this.